A millionaire wept before his mother's grave when a caregiver said, "She's alive." She swore the elderly woman was trapped in a nursing home, sedated, calling for her son every night. The man thought it was madness, until he realized he never saw the body on the day of the funeral. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing, Sunday always arrived with the same heavy feeling. Gabriel Anderson woke up in his luxurious penthouse on Park Avenue, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest, that pain that not even time could alleviate. 3 years had passed since his world collapsed, and still every Sunday morning brought the same sense of emptiness. He rose slowly, looked out the glass window at New York City, waking under the gray sky, and knew exactly what the day held. It was Sunday. Time to visit his mother. Megan was still asleep when he left the room. His wife always respected that solitary ritual, never insisted on accompanying him, never questioned why he needed to go every week. She understood, or at least said she understood. In the first few months after the loss, Megan had been his safe harbor, the person who organized everything when he was completely shattered by grief. It was she who took care of the details he didn't have the strength to face, who made the necessary decisions while he could barely get out of bed. Gabriel was grateful for that, deeply grateful. In the mirrored elevator, he adjusted the black tie he insisted on wearing on Sundays, a silent tribute. The doorman greeted him with a respectful nod, already accustomed to his punctual routine. The driver waited with the car ready, knowing the destination without needing to ask. Greenwood Cemetery, always the same place, always the white flowers Gabriel held carefully, bought from the corner florist that opened early for him. Traffic was light that Sunday morning. New York City had this strange gift of seeming like a completely different city on Sundays, calmer, almost melancholic. Gabriel looked out the car window at the familiar streets, the buildings that witnessed his history, and felt that painful familiarity of someone carrying a grief that never fully healed. His mother, Eleanor Anderson, had been the most important person in his life, a strong woman with a striking personality, who raised her son alone after his father abandoned them when Gabriel was a child. She worked tirelessly, built a small sewing business that grew over the years, and never allowed her son to lack anything. It was she who encouraged him to study, to dream big, to believe that he could be more than circumstances allowed. When Gabriel began to prosper in business, when he finally managed to give his mother the comfort she deserved, everything seemed to be falling into place. He bought a comfortable apartment for Eleanor, hired a nurse to accompany her after she began to experience health problems, ensured she had the best of everything. And then, suddenly, it all ended. A sudden heart attack, they said. Quick, without warning, without time for goodbyes. Gabriel was on a business trip when he received Megan's call. Her voice was trembling, shocked. Eleanor had passed away during the night. He needed to return immediately. The memory of that day still destroyed him. Gabriel arrived home to find everything already organized. Megan, efficient as always, had taken care of every detail. The wake was scheduled, the flowers ordered, the paperwork already submitted. She explained delicately that it would be better to keep the coffin closed. The heart attack had been very sudden. The body needed to undergo procedures. It would be more dignified that way, more respectful to Eleanor's memory. Gabriel, too devastated to question anything, simply agreed. He didn't have the strength to argue, to insist, to do anything but sit in that veiled room and cry for hours before a sealed coffin that held the person he loved most in the world. Now, 3 years later, Gabriel kept coming back, every week without fail. He parked the car, walked through the tree-lined paths of the cemetery, passed by known and unknown graves, until he reached the Anderson family plot. It was a beautiful, well-maintained place, with a marble headstone where Eleanor's name and the dates marking her passage through life were engraved. Gabriel always cleaned the stone carefully, replaced the withered flowers with fresh ones, and then sat there conversing silently with his mother. That Sunday, however, carried a different weight. The following week, Gabriel would inaugurate the Eleanor Anderson Foundation, a charitable project aimed at low-income women entrepreneurs. It was his way of transforming pain into a legacy, of ensuring that his mother's name continued to make a difference in the world. He had spent months planning every detail, choosing the team, defining the criteria. It would be the greatest tribute he could offer. But the closer the date approached, the more he felt that emptiness grow. It was as if inaugurating the foundation meant definitively accepting that she would not return, that chapter was closed forever. Gabriel knelt before the headstone and began to speak softly, as he always did. He talked about the foundation, about the plans, about how he was sure Eleanor would be proud. Tears came as they always did. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, feeling that mixture of longing and guilt that never left him. Guilt for not having been present, guilt for continuing to live while she was no longer there. That's when he heard footsteps. Gabriel looked up and saw a woman approaching. She was thin, appeared to be in her early 40s, wore a simple caregiver's uniform and carried a hesitant expression, as if deciding whether or not to interrupt that moment. Her eyes were kind, but there was something intense in her gaze, something that seemed to carry urgency. Gabriel stood up, a little disconcerted. It was not common to have visitors in that area of the cemetery on Sunday mornings. The woman stopped a few feet away, wringing her hands nervously. "Excuse me for bothering you, sir," she said in a low but respectful voice. I need to speak with you. It's about your mother." Gabriel felt a pang of irritation. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to approach him in the cemetery. Usually people wanting money, inventing stories about having known Eleanor, trying to take advantage of the situation. He was about to politely dismiss her when something in the woman's face made him hesitate. She didn't seem to be lying. In fact, she seemed terrified of what she was about to say. "What do you want?" Gabriel asked, trying to keep his voice firm. The woman took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "My name is Joanna. I work as a caregiver in a nursing home in the Astoria area, and I know your mother." Gabriel felt his blood run cold. Knew? What did she mean, knew? That made no sense at all. "She must be confusing people," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "My mother passed away 3 years ago." Joanna shook her head slowly, her eyes welling up. "No, sir. She didn't pass away. Your mother is alive. She's in the nursing home where I work." The world seemed to stop. Gabriel looked at the woman as if she had just spoken in another language. What she was saying was impossible, absurd, even cruel. He had cried before that grave for 3 years. He had gone through the wake, the formalities, the unbearable pain of loss. How dared that stranger appear there and say such a thing? "You're crazy," he said, his voice trembling. "This is disrespectful. I don't know what you want from me, but please leave." Joanna didn't move. She remained there still, with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "I know how this sounds, Mr. Anderson. I know it seems impossible, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to speak with you. Your mother is alive, sedated, in a nursing home. She's registered under another name, and for 3 years she's been living believing that you abandoned her." Gabriel felt his legs weaken. This couldn't be true. It couldn't. He had proof. There was a death certificate, documents, a grave. Everything was there, real, concrete. But something in that woman's voice, something in the way she looked at him, made a tiny crack open in his certainty. How can you claim such a thing?" he asked, his voice now almost a whisper. Joanna reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She opened it and showed it to Gabriel. It was a slightly blurry photo, clearly taken secretly with an old cell phone. In the image, there was an elderly woman lying in a simple hospital bed. Her face was thin, aged, but the features were unmistakable. Gabriel felt the air leave his lungs. That woman in the photo was incredibly similar to Eleanor. "She wears a necklace," Joanna continued, her voice low but firm. "A small silver pendant with a blue stone in the center. She never takes it off. She says it was a gift from her son, that he gave it to her on her 60th birthday. Gabriel staggered. The necklace. He had given that necklace to his mother. It was a unique, special piece that he had custom-made. How could that woman know about it? "She talks about you," Joanna continued, tears now flowing freely down her face. "In the moments when she wakes up between one medicine and another, she cries and asks for her son. She says someone tricked her, that someone forged her life. Nobody believes her. Everyone thinks they are delusions of a confused old lady. But I believed her, and the more I observed, the more certain I was that something was very wrong." Gabriel looked at his mother's grave. then at the photo in Joanna's hand, then again at the marble headstone where Eleanor Anderson's name was engraved. Nothing made sense. His world, so carefully rebuilt after the loss, was beginning to crack. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice choked. "Because your mother deserves it. Because I've seen many injustices in this life, Mr. Anderson, but none like this. Because for 3 years I've watched that woman waste away, sedated, forgotten by the world, crying for a son who the world said had lost her. And because if I did nothing, if I didn't try, I would be complicit in all of this." Gabriel closed his eyes. This couldn't be happening. But at the same time, for the first time in 3 years, an old, uncomfortable question returned to his mind. Why had he never seen his mother's body? Why had Megan insisted so much on keeping the coffin closed? Why had everything been resolved so quickly, so efficiently, so without his participation? "Where is this nursing home?" he asked, opening his eyes and looking at Joanna. She hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Franklin Street and Astoria Boulevard in the Astoria neighborhood. An old yellow building with no sign out front. I work there at night. If you go after 10. The guards aren't usually as attentive after that time." Gabriel took a business card from his pocket and handed it to Joanna. "Here's my number. I need to verify this. If what you're saying is true." Joanna took the card carefully, as if holding something precious. "I know it's true, sir. I just hope it's not too late." She turned to leave, but Gabriel called her. Joanna stopped and looked back. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from all this?" Joanna smiled, a sad and tired smile. "Nothing, Mr. Anderson. I gain nothing. But your mother, she was kind to me when no one else was. She shared the little food she had, held my hand when I cried, treated me as if I mattered. She reminded me that there is still goodness in the world, and I couldn't let her die believing her son had abandoned her." Gabriel watched Joanna walk away among the graves, her figure slowly disappearing among the cemetery trees. He stood there, alone, looking at his mother's headstone and feeling his entire known world begin to crumble. For 3 years he had cried before that grave. 3 years of pain, of guilt, of longing. And now a stranger appeared saying it was all a lie. Gabriel knelt again, touched the cold marble of the headstone, and whispered, "Mother, if you can hear me wherever you are, give me strength. Because if this is true, if you are alive, I will find you. I swear I will find you." He stood up and walked back to the car, his legs trembling, his mind in total turmoil. The driver asked if everything was all right, but Gabriel just shook his head and asked to be taken home. Throughout the journey, he held the photo Joanna had left in his hands. He looked at that aged, thin, suffering face and tried to find reasons to believe that it was all just a cruel mistake. But deep in his chest, something was awakening, a strange, disturbing sensation that he couldn't name. It was as if, after 3 years living in the darkness of grief, a tiny light had been lit. And that light, as frightening as it was, brought with it a possibility he didn't even dare to consider. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost his mother. The possibility that she was still there, somewhere, waiting for him. And if that were true, Gabriel thought as New York City passed by the car window, then someone had lied to him. Someone had built an elaborate farce, an empty grave, 3 years of suffering based on a lie. And he would need to find out who. He would need to find out why. And above all, he would need to decide if he had the courage to face a truth that could be even more painful than the loss he already knew. When he arrived home, Megan was in the living room reading a magazine. She looked up and smiled, that gentle and welcoming smile that always greeted him. "How was it at the cemetery, love?" she asked. Gabriel looked at his wife, at that woman who had been by his side during the worst moments of his life, and for the first time in 3 years felt a pang of distrust pierce his chest. "It was different," he replied, his voice carefully controlled. And as he went up to the bedroom, still holding Joanna's photo in his jacket pocket, Gabriel knew that nothing would ever be the same. The seed of doubt had been planted. And now, whether he wanted it or not, it would begin to grow, to spread, to demand answers that he might not be ready to hear. But he would need to listen, because if his mother was alive, if she was somewhere waiting for him, Gabriel would move heaven and earth to bring her back. And he would find out, whatever the cost, who had been capable of committing such profound cruelty. Night arrived slowly, and with it, the certainty that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Sunday night was the longest night of Gabriel's life. He feigned normalcy during dinner, responding to Megan's comments with monosyllables, avoiding looking directly at her. Every time his wife smiled or touched his hand, he felt that pang of distrust grow. It was irrational, he knew. Megan had always been his partner, the person who held his hands when his world collapsed. But now, with that photo burning in his pocket and Joanna's words echoing in his mind, Gabriel couldn't help but question absolutely everything. When Megan finally went to sleep, he waited to hear her breathing become deep and regular. Then, silently, he got out of bed, put on some discreet clothes and grabbed his car keys. He left a quick note in the kitchen, saying he had gone out to deal with a work emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. This was an emergency. Perhaps the biggest of his entire life. New York City at night had a different character. The streets that pulsed with life during the day now seemed deserted under the orange glow of the streetlights. Gabriel drove along the route Joanna had described, following Grand Central Parkway until he reached the Astoria neighborhood. The GPS indicated Franklin Street, and he slowed down at the intersection with Astoria Boulevard. There it was. An old 3-story building with peeling yellow paint, windows with rusted bars, and no sign identifying the place. It looked abandoned at first glance, but some faint lights on the upper floors indicated that there was life there. Gabriel parked on the other side of the street and watched, his heart beating erratically. Part of him still hoped it was all a terrible mistake. But another part knew he needed to discover the truth. It was almost 11 at night when he finally got out of the car and crossed the street. The front door was locked, but there was an old doorbell next to it. Gabriel pressed it and waited. After a few minutes, a middle-aged security guard appeared, looking suspiciously through the foggy glass. "Can I help you?" the man asked without fully opening the door. Gabriel quickly improvised. "Good evening. I received a call that my aunt is admitted here. Can I visit her?" The guard frowned. "Visiting hours are only until 8. "Who is your aunt?" "Eleanor," Gabriel replied. "Eleanor Anderson." The man shook his head. "We don't have anyone with that name here." Gabriel felt his stomach drop, but then remembered what Joanna had said. False name. He changed strategy. "Look, I know it's late, but it's important. I came from far away. Could you please check again? Maybe she's registered under another name. She's about 70 years old, gray hair, usually wears a silver necklace." The guard hesitated, then sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared for a few minutes, leaving Gabriel standing in the cold, dimly lit corridor. The smell of the place was characteristic of old institutions, a mixture of disinfectant, reheated food, and something else he couldn't identify. Finally, the man returned, bringing with him a thin woman in a white uniform. It was Joanna. Her eyes widened when she saw Gabriel, but she quickly disguised her surprise. "Mr. Anderson," she said in a low voice, with an almost imperceptible nod. "I'm glad you came." "You know him?" the guard asked, still suspicious. "Yes, I do. He's a relative of one of the residents. I can take him to her," Joanna replied firmly. The guard seemed satisfied with the answer and returned to his chair near the entrance. Joanna motioned for Gabriel to follow her and began to climb a narrow staircase. They didn't speak during the ascent, only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the peeling walls. On the second floor, Joanna stopped before a door and looked at Gabriel. "She's sleeping now. They give her strong medication every night, but in a few minutes the effect will start to wear off. That's when she usually wakes up confused, calling for you," Joanna explained. "Mr. Anderson, I need you to be prepared. She's not well. 3 years of heavy medication, of loneliness, and it destroys a person." Gabriel nodded, unable to speak. Joanna opened the door slowly, and they entered a small room, lit only by a faint light from the hallway. There was a simple bed against the wall, and on it, a figure huddled under a thin sheet. Gabriel approached slowly, each step seeming to weigh tons. When he finally stood beside the bed and looked at the woman's face, the world crumbled beneath his feet. It was Eleanor, his mother, alive. Her face was much thinner, marked by suffering, but it was undeniably her. Her grey hair spread on the pillow, her thin hands on her chest, the silver necklace with the blue stone shining in the dim light. Gabriel felt his legs weaken and had to lean against the wall. It wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. For 3 years he had mourned her death. 3 years visiting an empty grave. 3 years carrying devastating guilt. 3 years believing he would never see that face again. And now she was there, in front of him. Alive. "Mother," he whispered, his voice completely breaking. Joanna gently touched his shoulder. "She'll wake up in a few minutes. The medication is wearing off. But when she wakes up, she might not recognize you immediately. The medication makes her confused." Gabriel sat in the chair beside the bed, unable to take his eyes off that fragile figure. How could someone have done this? Questions exploded in his mind, but no answers came. He extended a trembling hand and delicately touched his mother's hand. Her skin was cold, her fingers thin, but it was real. It was her. Then Eleanor began to stir. First there were small movements, her fingers contracting, her head turning slightly. Then her eyes began to open, heavy. She blinked several times, confused, trying to focus. Her gaze wandered around the room until it found Gabriel beside the bed. For a few seconds, she just looked blankly. Then, slowly, something began to change in her face. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening in a silent exclamation. Tears began to flow even before she could speak. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "My son, you came." Gabriel couldn't hold back anymore. He knelt beside the bed and held his mother's hands tightly, tears falling freely. "I'm here, Mother. I'm here. I'm so sorry." Eleanor began to cry too, trying to sit up. Joanna came to help her, placing a pillow behind her back. "I knew," Eleanor said between sobs. "I knew you hadn't abandoned me. I knew you would come. But they told me so many times that you didn't want to see me anymore, that I was a burden." "No, Mother, no, that was never true. I thought you had passed away. They told me you had a heart attack. They held a wake. There's a grave with your name on it. I visited it for 3 years, believing I had lost you." Eleanor held her son's face with trembling hands, touching him as if she needed to be sure he was real. "They tricked me, son. That night someone gave me something to drink. I don't remember much after that. I woke up here not knowing where I was. I tried to speak. I tried to explain, but the medicines... They gave me so many medicines that I could barely think. And when I tried to talk about you, everyone said it was confusion. Who did this to you, Mother? Who brought you here?" Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to remember. "It was after that argument. Megan and I had a fight. She wanted me to sign some papers, said it was for your good, to protect your assets. But I read those documents, Gabriel. They would give her total control over everything, over your company, your accounts, everything. I refused. I said I would talk to you first. She got furious." Gabriel felt his blood run cold. Megan, his wife, the woman he loved, whom he trusted. "No," he shook his head. "It can't be. She helped me when everything happened. She organized everything." "She did organize everything, son," Eleanor said, "because she planned everything. That night, after the argument, she came back with a cup of tea. She said she wanted to make amends. I drank it. And then everything became confused. I remember people carrying me, being in a car, voices saying I would never see you again. I woke up here, registered under another name. Mary Smith. A generic name that turned me into a nobody." Gabriel let go of his mother's hands and stood up, staggering. The room seemed to spin. Megan, the woman who slept beside him every night, the woman he had consoled during his false grief, who had cried in his arms. How could she have done something so monstrous? Joanna approached, holding out a yellowed envelope. "Mr. Anderson, I investigated. Here is your mother's admission record. See the date, see the signature." Gabriel took the paper with trembling hands. The admission date was 3 years ago, exactly 1 week before Eleanor's supposed death. And on the responsible party line was a signature he would recognize anywhere. Megan Anderson. "There's more," Joanna continued, pulling out other papers. "I worked here for 3 years. I always found Mrs. Anderson's case strange, so I started investigating. I discovered that someone paid monthly to keep her here, sedated without visits. The payments came from an offshore account, but I managed to trace them. Anderson Holdings, your wife's company." Gabriel looked at the documents, feeling reality shatter. How did she manage to do all this? The death certificate, the wake, the grave. Joanna pointed to another document. Here, the doctor who signed the certificate had his license revoked for fraud. He sold fake documents. The wake was at a funeral home that closed shortly after, and the grave never received any body. It was just a performance. "But why?" Gabriel asked, his voice a moan of pain. "Why would Megan do this?" Eleanor took a deep breath, tears still flowing. "For the money, son. It was always for the money. She knew I would never allow her to have total control over you, over the assets. I always suspected her intentions. I tried to warn you before the wedding. But you were in love," Gabriel remembered. He remembered the tense conversations between his mother and Megan, Eleanor's attempts to make him question the rush of the wedding. At the time, he thought it was maternal jealousy. Now he understood that Eleanor had seen something he had refused to see. "With you in mourning, it was easy for her to take control of everything," Eleanor continued. "You signed papers without reading, delegated decisions, let her handle the finances while you tried to survive the pain. She got what she wanted. And I stayed here, alive but dead to the world, a ghost she kept sedated." Gabriel sat down again, burying his face in his hands. For 3 years he had loved a liar. He had slept beside a woman capable of such profound cruelty. He had trusted her completely while she pretended to console him for a loss she herself had orchestrated. "What do I do now?" he asked, raising his face to look at his mother. Eleanor held his hand again, squeezing with the strength she still had. "You seek justice, son. You expose the truth. You don't let her get away with everything she's done." Joanna approached again. "Mr. Anderson, I have more evidence. During these 3 years, every time I noticed something suspicious, I wrote it down. I have records of all the times people came to visit your mother secretly to make sure she remained sedated. I have photos, notes, everything. If we go to the police with this evidence, she won't be able to escape." Gabriel looked at Joanna with gratitude. "Why did you do all this? Why did you risk so much?" Joanna smiled sadly. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible, Mr. Anderson. I know what it's like for the world to pretend you don't exist. Before working here, I lived on the streets. I was addicted. I lost everything. I was just another person society preferred not to see. Your mother was the first person in years who looked at me as if I were a human being. She shared food with me when she barely had anything to eat. She held my hand when I cried. She reminded me that I still had value. I couldn't abandon her, not after everything she did for me." Eleanor extended her hand to Joanna, and the two embraced. Gabriel observed the scene. 2 women the world had tried to erase, supporting each other, and felt something stir within his chest. Anger. A deep, burning anger against the woman who had destroyed so many lives for greed. "We're getting you out of here, Mother," Gabriel said, standing up. "I'm taking you to a real hospital where they can take proper care of you. And then we're going to expose all of this. We're going to show the whole world what Megan did." Eleanor shook her head. "Be careful, son. She's dangerous. If she was capable of all this, there are no limits to what else she can do when she feels cornered." Gabriel helped his mother get out of bed. She was weak. The 3 years of sedation had taken their toll, but there was determination in her eyes. Joanna brought an old coat and helped Eleanor put it on. As they slowly descended the stairs, Gabriel planned his next steps. First, he would take his mother to a safe place, then he would gather all the evidence, and then he would confront Megan, not with violence, not with blind hatred, but with the truth. A truth she could not deny, could not distort, could not bury. When they left through the front door, the security guard was asleep in his chair. They crossed the corridor in silence and reached the deserted street. Gabriel helped his mother into the car, settling her in the back seat carefully. Joanna stood on the sidewalk watching. "Come with us," Gabriel told her. "You're part of this now, and I guarantee you'll have a safe place to stay." Joanna hesitated, then nodded and got into the car. As Gabriel drove through the empty streets of New York City, heading to a private hospital where he knew his mother would be well cared for, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Eleanor holding Joanna's hand. 2 survivors, 2 women who refused to give up. And then Gabriel thought of Megan, still sleeping peacefully in the penthouse, unaware that her world built on lies was about to crumble. She had underestimated 3 things: the strength of a mother who refused to be forgotten, the courage of an invisible woman who would not accept silence, and the love of a son willing to move mountains to find the truth. The morning was beginning to lighten when Gabriel finally parked in front of the hospital. A new life was beginning for all of them, and this time it would be a life based on truth, however painful it might be. The sun was just rising when Gabriel left Eleanor settled in a private suite at New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of New York City's best. He had called trusted doctors who began to assess her health, concerned about the effects of 3 years of sedation. Joanna stayed by his mother's side, holding her hand, promising she wouldn't leave. Gabriel watched the scene, feeling immense gratitude for the woman who had risked everything to save a stranger. Before leaving the hospital, Gabriel spoke with the head of security. "No one but me can enter this room, no one, not even if they present documents saying they are family. Do you understand?" The man nodded, realizing by the seriousness of his tone that this was not a common request. "Consider it done, Mr. Anderson. We'll place guards at the door." Gabriel left the hospital with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now came the hardest part. He needed to go home and pretend that nothing had changed. He needed to look at Megan and not let on that he knew everything, because if she realized he had discovered the truth, there was no telling what she might do. Gabriel knew of cases where people, when cornered, became even more dangerous. On the way back, he called Richard Campbell, his personal lawyer and longtime friend. Richard answered sleepily, surprised by the early call. "Gabriel, what time is it? Is everything all right?" "Richard, I need you to come to my office now. It's urgent, and don't tell anyone, absolutely anyone, that I called." There was a silence on the other end. Richard had known Gabriel for years and knew when something serious was happening. "I'm leaving now, 20 minutes. When Gabriel arrived home, it was almost 7 in the morning. He went up silently, expecting to find Megan still sleeping, but she was awake, sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee, wearing the silk robe he had given her for her last birthday. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Love, where were you? I woke up in the middle of the night and you weren't here. I was worried," she said, getting up to kiss him. Gabriel had to make an immense effort not to flinch. He kissed her back, forcing a smile. "Sorry, I had an emergency at the office. A problem with an international investor. You know how it is." Megan ran her hand over his face affectionately. "You're working too much, Gabriel. You need to rest." He looked at that woman, at that face he had loved for years, and felt a mixture of disgust and disbelief. How could she pretend so well? How could she look him in the eyes and lie so naturally? For 3 years she had slept beside him, knowing that his mother was alive, imprisoned, sedated. For 3 years she had consoled his grief, knowing that that grief was a farce she herself had created. "I know," he replied, gently moving away. "I'm going to take a shower, and then I need to go to the office to sort some things out. I don't know what time I'll be back." Megan frowned slightly. "On Sunday? Gabriel, you promised you'd try to work less on weekends." "It's important," he said, already going up the stairs. In the shower, Gabriel let the hot water fall over his body as the tears finally came. He cried for his mother, for the 3 years stolen from her, for the cruelty she had suffered. He cried for the betrayal, for the love he had wasted on a woman capable of such malice. He cried for the naive man he had been, blinded by passion, unable to see the signs his mother had tried to show him. When he got out of the shower, Gabriel was more composed. He got dressed, grabbed some important documents, and went downstairs. Megan was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, her back to him. For a moment, Gabriel thought about confronting her right there, about shouting all the truths that burned inside him. But he controlled himself. He needed to do this the right way, with evidence, with witnesses, with justice on his side. "See you later," he said, kissing her forehead. Megan held his arm. "Is everything all right, love? You're acting strange." Gabriel forced another smile. "Just tired, but everything's fine." She let go of him, but her gaze remained suspicious. Gabriel left the house feeling those eyes on his back. At the office, Richard was already waiting. The lawyer was in his early 40s, with neatly combed grey hair, and an always serious expression that hid a loyal heart. He and Gabriel had studied together, built parallel careers, and maintained a solid friendship over the years. "What's going on, Gabriel? You scared me with that call." Gabriel locked the office door and opened the built-in safe in the wall. From inside, he took out a folder where he had placed all the documents Joanna had given him, as well as the photo of Eleanor in the nursing home. He handed everything to Richard, who began to examine them with increasing attention. "What is this?" Richard asked, his eyes wide. "It's my mother," Gabriel said, his voice firm. "She's alive, and Megan is the one who kept her prisoner for 3 years. Richard looked up from the papers, completely shocked. "Gabriel, this isn't possible. Eleanor, We were at the wake. I saw the grave. You saw a sealed coffin and an empty grave, just like me. Megan faked everything, Richard. The death certificate is fake, signed by a doctor whose license was revoked. The wake was staged at a funeral home that closed shortly after. And my mother spent 3 years sedated in a nursing home, registered under a false name. Richard ran his hand over his face, trying to process the information. How did you find out? A caregiver from the nursing home found me at the cemetery. She had been observing my mother for years, suspicious of the situation. When she found out who I was, she decided to tell me the truth. And Eleanor is where now? At New York Presbyterian, with increased security. I don't know how far Megan is capable of going when she finds out I know everything. Richard began to read the documents more carefully. Here are records of payments coming from Anderson Holdings. Gabriel, this company is in Megan's name, but you're signed as co-responsible. Did you know about these payments? No. I delegated the management of the company to her after I thought my mother had died. I signed so many things during that period without really reading them. I was in shock, in mourning. She took advantage of that. Richard shook his head, incredulous. This is an elaborate fraud, Gabriel. This wasn't done overnight. She planned every detail. I know. And now I need to dismantle this castle of lies piece by piece. But I need to do it carefully. If she realizes I don't know what might happen. Richard was silent for a moment, thinking. We need to gather more evidence. The caregiver's testimony is important. But we need more. We need to trace all the payments, find the people who participated in the fraud, get the true medical records from the nursing home. And we need to do all this without Megan suspecting. How? Richard took a deep breath. First, we'll get a court order to investigate Anderson Holdings' accounts. I can speak with a trusted judge, explain the situation, ask for absolute secrecy. Second, we need to hire a private investigator to track all of Megan's movements over the past 3 years. Third, we need to protect Eleanor. She's the main witness. If anything happens to her... He didn't finish the sentence, but Gabriel understood. I've already put security in her room, and the caregiver, Joanna, is with her. She was the only person who believed my mother all these years. We need to protect Joanna too. If Megan finds out her role in all this, she becomes a target. Gabriel nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Richard, if we go ahead with this, there's no turning back. My marriage will end, my life will be turned upside down. The press will have a field day with this story. Richard looked directly into his friend's eyes. And if you don't go ahead, can you live knowing that the woman who sleeps beside you kept your mother prisoner? Can you pretend you don't know anything? Can you let her get away with it? Gabriel closed his eyes. No, I can't. Then there's no choice, Gabriel. We'll expose everything. We'll get justice. And we'll make sure she pays for every day Eleanor suffered. In the following days, Gabriel lived an exhausting double life. During the day, he feigned normalcy at home, talked with Megan, had dinner with her, slept beside her. But every gesture was calculated, every word measured. He observed everything she did, looking for signs, trying to understand how he hadn't noticed who she really was before. At night, when Megan slept, Gabriel silently left and went to the hospital to visit his mother. Eleanor was slowly recovering. Doctors said it would be a long process to reverse the effects of prolonged sedation, but she was responding well to treatment. Gabriel spent hours by her side, listening to stories of the 3 lost years, repeatedly asking for forgiveness for not realizing the truth sooner. It wasn't your fault, son, Eleanor always said, holding his hand. She's a manipulator. She knew exactly how to act so you would never suspect. Meanwhile, Richard worked silently behind the scenes. He obtained the court order and began investigating Anderson Holdings' accounts. What he discovered was even more shocking than he expected. Megan had embezzled millions over the 3 years, transferring funds to offshore accounts, creating shell companies, buying properties in third parties' names. The assets Gabriel had built over years were being systematically plundered. The private investigator, a discreet man named Paul Miller, began following Megan. He discovered that she had frequent meetings with a man who was not Gabriel. Photos showed encounters in expensive restaurants, luxury hotels. Megan was not just financially stealing from Gabriel, she was also betraying him. When Gabriel saw the photos, he felt a pang of pain, but it was different from what he expected. It wasn't jealousy, it was almost relief. More proof that the woman he had loved had never truly existed. It was all a farce. Richard also tracked down the doctor who had signed the false death certificate. The man was living in a small town upstate, trying to rebuild his life after losing his license. When Paul Miller found him and explained that he could face serious problems if he didn't cooperate, the doctor confessed everything. Megan had approached him 3 years ago, offered a large sum to sign the false document. He was desperate for money, had gambling debts, and accepted. Now he was willing to testify. The funeral home was also investigated. The owner had closed the business and moved to another city, but was located. He recounted that Megan paid for a full wake, but without a body. The coffin was empty. He never questioned it because the money was good, and she said it was a complicated family situation. Piece by piece, the truth was being assembled. Richard compiled everything into a voluminous dossier with hundreds of pages of documents, photos, testimonies, bank records. It was irrefutable proof that Megan had orchestrated one of the most elaborate frauds he had ever seen. On Thursday of that week, Richard called Gabriel. "It's ready, we have everything. Tomorrow morning we're going to the police and formally filing the complaint." Gabriel was in his office when he received the call. He looked out the glass window at New York City, stretching out below him, thinking about how everything was about to change. "I'm ready." "One thing, Gabriel," Richard said. "When we file the complaint, the police will arrest Megan immediately. Are you sure you want to do this? There's no turning back once we start?" Gabriel thought of his mother, of the 3 years she lost. He thought of Joanna, fighting alone to bring the truth to light. He thought of himself, of the 3 years he spent crying before an empty grave, while Megan slept peacefully beside him. "I'm absolutely sure." "Then tomorrow at 9 in the morning at the Central Precinct. I'll be there with all the documents. You bring Eleanor and Joanna to give their statements, and we'll also bring Paul with all the photographic evidence." "Agreed." Gabriel hung up and looked at the phone in his hands. Only one more night remained. One last night pretending he knew nothing. One last night sleeping beside the woman who had destroyed his life. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. Tomorrow, justice would begin to be served. When he arrived home that night, Megan was especially affectionate. She cooked his favorite dinner, chose an expensive wine, put on ambient music. Gabriel participated in the charade, talking about trivial matters, smiling at the appropriate moments, pretending that this was just another normal night. But when he went to sleep, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Beside him, Megan slept soundly, her breathing calm and regular. How could she sleep so peacefully, he wondered. How could she live with the weight of everything she had done? Gabriel thought about waking her up right then, about telling her everything he knew, about seeing the expression on her face when she realized she had been discovered. But he controlled himself. Tomorrow she would know. Tomorrow the castle of lies she had built would completely crumble, and he would be there to see every stone fall. When the sun began to rise, Gabriel quietly got up. He showered, put on a dark suit, adjusted his tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a different man from the one who woke up every Sunday to visit an empty grave. This man had purpose. This man had a mission. This man was going to get justice. He went downstairs and found Megan in the kitchen making coffee. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, love. Are you leaving early again?" Gabriel looked at her, committing that moment to memory. The last time she looked at him without knowing that everything was about to end. "Yes," he replied. "I have an important meeting." Megan approached and straightened his tie. "Good luck, then." Gabriel held her hand for a moment, looking into the eyes of the woman he had loved, whom he had trusted, who had destroyed everything. "Thank you," he said. And then he left, closing the door behind him for the last time as a man married to Megan. When he returned to that house, it would be as a free man, free from the lie, free from the betrayal, free from the woman who had tried to bury his mother alive. Richard was waiting in front of the police precinct. Beside him were Eleanor, supported by Joanna, and Paul with several folders of documents. Gabriel parked and walked towards them, feeling the weight of the moment. "Let's do this," he said. And together they entered the precinct to tell the world a story no one would believe. The story of a woman who had faked her mother-in-law's death to rob her husband. The story of 3 years of lies. The story of an empty grave and a truth that was finally coming to light. The Manhattan Criminal Court was bustling that Friday morning. Gabriel entered accompanied by Richard, Eleanor, Joanna, and Paul, carrying boxes of documents that represented 3 years of investigation condensed into 1 week. The responsible detective, Dr. Frank Taylor, a 50-year-old man with a serious expression and keen eyes, received them in his office. "Mr. Anderson, Dr. Campbell briefly explained the situation to me over the phone, but I confess I found it hard to believe," the detective said, gesturing for everyone to sit down. "A fraud of this magnitude, maintained for so long, is rare." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I understand, Detective. I myself had trouble believing it, but all the evidence is here, and the main witness is my mother, whom everyone believed to be dead for 3 years. The detective looked at Eleanor, who was sitting next to Joanna, still fragile but with a determined look. "Are you Eleanor Anderson?" "I am, Detective," Eleanor replied, her voice still a little hoarse from the years of sedation. "And I'm here to tell you everything they did to me." Over the next 3 hours, each person gave their statement. Eleanor recounted the argument with Megan, the document she refused to sign, the poisoned tea, and waking up in the nursing home. Her voice trembled at times, especially when describing the 3 years living sedated, believing her son had abandoned her. Joanna reported how she began to suspect, how she noted every suspicious detail for years, how she finally decided to look for Gabriel at the cemetery. She showed the notebook where she had recorded everything, pages and pages of notes documenting Eleanor's imprisonment. Richard presented the bank documents, showing the embezzlement of millions of dollars, the transfers to offshore accounts, the shell companies. Paul brought photos of Megan's betrayal, records of her suspicious meetings, the testimonies he had collected. The detective listened to everything with increasing attention, taking notes, asking for clarifications. When everyone finished, he leaned back in his chair, visibly impacted. "This is one of the most elaborate frauds I've seen in my career," he said. "Mr. Anderson, are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with this? Once we start the process, your life will become a media circus." Gabriel looked at his mother, then at Joanna, and finally at the detective. "I am absolutely sure. My mother spent 3 years imprisoned, sedated, believing I had abandoned her. There is no price too high to get justice." The detective nodded. "Very well. I will immediately issue a preventive arrest warrant for Megan Anderson. We will also freeze all bank accounts associated with her and launch a full investigation, Mr. Anderson. You need to be prepared because when we arrest your wife, it will be in all the newspapers by the end of the day." "I know," Gabriel replied. The detective picked up the phone and began giving orders. In less than an hour, a police team was on its way to the penthouse on Park Avenue. Gabriel asked not to be present at the time of the arrest. He didn't have the strength to see it. Instead, he returned with his mother and Joanna to the hospital, where they would await news. It was 2 hours of agonizing waiting. Gabriel held his mother's hand, the two of them sitting in the hospital room in silence. Joanna brought coffee, but no one could drink it. At 11:30 in the morning, Gabriel's phone rang. It was Richard. "It's done. The police just arrested Megan. She resisted, screamed, threatened to sue everyone, but she's in custody now." Gabriel closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. "Thank you, Richard." "There's something else, Gabriel. The press has already found out. There are journalists in front of the precinct, in front of the hospital, in front of your house. This is going to explode." And it did explode. Within hours, the story was on all television channels, all news websites, all social media. "Businessman discovers mother alive after 3 years crying at empty grave. Wife accused of faking death and embezzling millions." Details were scarce at first, but as the day progressed, more information leaked. Gabriel turned off his cell phone after receiving the 100th call from journalists. He wasn't ready to talk to the press. Not yet. First, he needed to process everything that was happening. First, he needed to be sure his mother was safe. In the afternoon, Detective Taylor called personally. "Mr. Anderson, Megan is asking to speak with you. She says she will only give a statement if she can talk to you first." Gabriel felt his stomach churn. "I don't want to see her." "I understand, but it could be strategic. If she confesses in front of you with witnesses, it strengthens the case. You don't have to be alone with her. I and other officers will be in the room." Gabriel looked at his mother. Eleanor held his hand tightly. "Go, son. Look her in the eyes and let her see that she couldn't destroy you." Half an hour later, Gabriel entered the precinct through the back door, avoiding the journalists who surrounded the main entrance. The detective led him to an interrogation room. Megan was sitting handcuffed, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared with tears. When she saw Gabriel enter, she stood up abruptly. "Gabriel, thank God. You need to clear up this misunderstanding. I can explain everything." Gabriel pulled up a chair and sat on the other side of the table, keeping his distance. "Then explain. Explain how my mother, who should be dead, spent 3 years sedated in a nursing home." Megan shook her head frantically. "It wasn't like that. You don't understand. Your mother was sick, Gabriel. She was having delusions, saying absurd things. I tried to help." "You tried to help by drugging her and registering her under a false name? You tried to help by forging a death certificate and having a wake with an empty coffin?" Megan's tears seemed genuine, but Gabriel no longer knew what was real and what was theater. "I was desperate. She was going to ruin everything. She was going to make you lose everything you built. So you decided to kill her? Socially, legally, you killed her." "No!" Megan screamed. "I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted... You needed the money," Gabriel completed, his voice cold. "You needed control. You needed to manipulate me while you stole millions, and along the way you destroyed an innocent woman." Megan tried to hold his hands across the table, but Gabriel pulled back. "I love you, Gabriel. Everything I did was for us." "No," Gabriel said, standing up. "Everything you did was for you, and now you're going to pay for it." Megan began to scream as Gabriel left the room. "You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. We have a life together." "Gabriel, please." But he didn't look back. He left the precinct through the same back door, got into the car Richard had provided, and returned to the hospital. When he reached his mother's room, his legs finally gave way. He sat down and cried, all the tension of the past few days finally exploding. Eleanor and Joanna embraced him, the 3 people who had been victims of the same woman, now united by the truth that had finally come to light. In the following days, the case gained national proportions. Television programs debated the topic. Experts analyzed how a fraud of that magnitude could have been maintained for so long. Many praised Joanna's courage, a humble caregiver who risked everything to save a stranger. Others questioned how Gabriel hadn't noticed anything. The media was relentless, but Gabriel decided to use that exposure to his advantage. He gave a single press conference in which he introduced Eleanor to the world. Mother and son sat side by side, and Gabriel told the whole story. Eleanor, still fragile but determined, confirmed every detail. "I lost 3 years of my life," Eleanor said before the cameras, her voice firm. 3 years believing my son had abandoned me. 3 years sedated, invisible, treated as if I didn't exist. But I survived, and now I want my story to serve as a warning. There are many invisible elderly people out there, forgotten in nursing homes, silenced, voiceless. I was lucky to have someone who believed in me, and that someone was Joanna, who was sitting in the audience. Gabriel called her to the stage. "This woman," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder, "saved my mother when the whole world had forgotten her. She had nothing to gain, much to lose, but she chose to do what was right." Joanna, crying, shook her head. "I just did what any decent person would do." "But many wouldn't," Gabriel replied. "And because of that, from today on, Joanna is not just a caregiver. She is the director of the Eleanor Anderson Foundation, which we will inaugurate next week." The news surprised everyone, including Joanna, who looked at Gabriel with wide eyes. "Mr. Anderson, I can't. I don't have the training for that." "You have something more important," Gabriel said. "You have heart, you have courage, and you understand what it means to be invisible. This foundation will help women entrepreneurs, but it will also create a special program for caregivers and the elderly, to ensure that no other Eleanor is forgotten." The audience of journalists applauded. That horror story was transforming into something bigger. It was becoming a symbol of hope, of justice, of a second chance. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Megan remained imprisoned. Her lawyer tried to request release, claiming she had roots in the community and posed no flight risk. But the judge denied it, citing the gravity of the crimes and the coldness with which they were planned. Megan would be tried while imprisoned. Investigations continued to reveal layer after layer of fraud. More bank accounts were discovered, more shell companies, more properties bought with embezzled money. The stolen assets exceeded $10 million. Megan had built an empire at Gabriel's expense, all while pretending to be the devoted wife. The man she was meeting with was also identified. He was a dishonest lawyer who helped her structure the financial schemes. He was also arrested as an accomplice. A month after the arrest, Gabriel was back at Greenwood Cemetery, but this time he wasn't there to cry. He was there to close a cycle. He had hired a company to remove the false headstone, to dismantle the empty grave that had been the scene of 3 years of suffering. Eleanor was by his side, leaning on a cane but growing stronger every day. Joanna was also there, and Richard, and some close friends who had supported Gabriel throughout the process. "This place means nothing anymore," Gabriel said, looking at where the headstone used to be. "For 3 years I came here believing a lie, but now I know the truth. And I came here to say goodbye, not to my mother, because she is alive and well, but goodbye to the man I was, that naive, blind man who believed in illusions." He stood up. "In his place, a man was born who knows the value of truth, who understands the price of betrayal, but who also learned about forgiveness, about second chances, about transforming pain into purpose." Gabriel left the cemetery knowing he would never return. That chapter was closed. Real life, true life, was out there, waiting for him. A week later, the Eleanor Anderson Foundation was inaugurated in an emotional ceremony. Hundreds of people attended, including many who had been touched by the story. The chosen building was spacious and modern, with rooms for courses, meeting spaces, and an entire department dedicated to the well-being of the elderly and caregivers. Gabriel gave a brief but powerful speech. "This foundation was born of pain, but it exists to create hope. It was born of injustice, but it exists to promote justice. And it was born of the love between mother and son that not even 3 years of lies could destroy." Eleanor cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Joanna, the 2 women who had survived the worst and were now ready to help others do the same. The cameras recorded everything, but Gabriel knew that moment was much more than a news story. It was a victory over lies, over cruelty, over greed. That night, Gabriel had dinner with his mother at the apartment he had rented for her, a cozy place overlooking Central Park. They talked about the past, about the future, about plans for the foundation. And for the first time in 3 years, Gabriel felt complete. "You know the trial will be difficult, don't you?" Eleanor said. "It will bring everything back to the surface. You'll have to relive every moment." "I know, Mother, but I need to be there. I need to look at her and show her that she couldn't destroy me, that she couldn't destroy you." Eleanor held her son's hand. "You are a strong man, Gabriel, stronger than I imagined, and I am very proud of you." Gabriel felt tears come again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for having his mother back, gratitude for Joanna having had the courage to tell the truth, gratitude for having friends like Richard who stood by him. "Thank you for never giving up, Mother. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for believing I would come back." Eleanor smiled, that tired but genuine smile of someone who had been through hell and managed to return. "I am your mother, Gabriel. I will always believe in you. Always." They stayed up late talking, recovering the 3 lost years one story at a time. Outside, New York City continued its bustling nightlife. Millions of people living their own stories, facing their own battles. But there, in that apartment, 2 people who had been separated by the cruelest lie were together again. And that, Gabriel thought as he hugged his mother, was all that mattered. The truth had won. Justice was being served, and the love between mother and son, that love Megan had tried to destroy, was stronger than ever. The empty grave had been just that, empty. But the life they were building now, that was real, that was true, that was theirs. And no one, ever again, could take that from them. 3 months had passed since Megan's arrest, 3 months of headlines, investigations, and revelations that seemed endless. Gabriel had temporarily stepped away from his businesses, leaving the company's management to trusted individuals while dedicating himself to caring for his mother and preparing for the approaching trial. Eleanor had made remarkable progress. Doctors were impressed with her recovery, both physical and mental. The effects of prolonged sedation were slowly being reversed, and she could already walk without assistance, although she still tired easily. But most importantly, the sparkle had returned to her eyes. The woman Gabriel had visited in the nursing home, thin and broken, was gradually transforming back into the strong mother he had known. The Eleanor Anderson Foundation was already operating at full speed under Joanna's direction. In the first 2 months, over 200 women had been assisted, receiving training courses, microcredit to start businesses, and psychological support. But the most special project was the Invisible Voices program, dedicated to identifying and helping vulnerable elderly people in nursing homes and institutions. Joanna proved to be a natural administrator. She understood people's pain because she had lived through that pain. She knew what it was like to be invisible, to be discarded by society, to be considered less than nothing. And she used that experience to create programs that truly made a difference. Gabriel visited the foundation weekly, always impressed with the work being done. On one of these visits, Joanna called him into her office. "Mr. Anderson, there's something I'd like to show you," she said, picking up a folder. "In recent weeks, we've received dozens of letters from people who saw Mrs. Anderson's story on television. Many are from families who suspect something similar may have happened to their loved ones." Gabriel leafed through the letters, his heart aching. There were stories of sudden disappearances, of elderly people who vanished without explanation, of families who never got answers. "How many other Eleanors are out there?" he asked. "Many," Joanna replied, "and I would like your authorization to create a task force. We can work with authorities to investigate these cases. Perhaps not all are frauds, but some may be." Gabriel nodded immediately. "Do it, Joanna. Use all the resources you need. If we can save at least one more person, it will have been worth it." While the foundation grew and made a difference, the date of Megan's trial finally arrived. It was a cold Monday in August when Gabriel entered the Manhattan Criminal Court alongside Richard. The place was surrounded by journalists, television cameras, and curious onlookers. The case had become one of the most talked about of the year. The courtroom was packed. Gabriel sat in the front row next to Eleanor and Joanna. On the other side, Megan was brought in handcuffed, wearing a discreet suit that her lawyer had surely chosen to convey an image of respectability. When she entered, her eyes immediately sought Gabriel. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. There was nothing left to say. The judge, Dr. Mark Turner, a 60-year-old man with a reputation for being rigorous but fair, opened the session. The accusation was extensive: document fraud, false imprisonment, embezzlement of funds, identity fraud, misappropriation of assets. The prosecutor, Dr. Patricia Davis, a determined 40-year-old woman, presented the case meticulously. During the first 2 days, witnesses were heard. The doctor who signed the false certificate confessed again, this time before the judge, explaining how Megan had approached him, how much she paid, how everything was planned. The funeral home owner confirmed that the wake was a farce, that the coffin was empty, that it was all a paid staging. Nursing home staff testified about the mysterious payments, about the elderly woman registered under a false name, about the express orders to keep her sedated. Each testimony was more devastating than the last, building a complete picture of the meticulously planned cruelty. On the third day, it was Joanna's turn to take the witness stand. She was visibly nervous, but when she began to speak, her voice came out firm and clear. "I worked in that nursing home for 3 years," she said, "and throughout that time, I never saw a case as cruel as Mrs. Anderson's. She was lucid. She knew exactly who she was, who her son was, what was happening, but no one believed her. And the more she tried to explain, the more medicine they gave her." The prosecutor asked, "And why did you decide to investigate the case?" "Because I knew what it was like to be invisible," Joanna replied, tears beginning to flow. "I've lived on the streets. I've been addicted. I've been discarded by society. I know what it's like when no one sees you, when no one believes you, and I couldn't let that continue to happen to Mrs. Anderson." Joanna's testimony moved the entire room. Even the judge seemed touched. When she stepped down from the stand, Gabriel hugged her, whispering a heartfelt thank you. On the 4th day, Eleanor was called to testify. Gabriel held her hand before she went up, giving her strength. His mother was pale but determined. She walked to the stand with her head held high, looked at Megan without fear, and began her account. "I raised my son alone after his father abandoned us," Eleanor began. "I worked day and night to give him everything he deserved. I watched him grow up, graduate, build a successful life. And when he introduced me to Megan, I wanted to believe she was the right person for him. But something in me always knew she wasn't." She recounted the arguments, the documents Megan wanted her to sign, her refusal, and the ensuing fight. I knew those papers would give her total control over my son's life, over the assets he built with so much effort, and I couldn't allow that. Eleanor described the night everything changed. She came back with a cup of tea saying she wanted to make amends. I trusted her. I drank that tea. And then everything became confused. I remember voices being carried, waking up in a strange place without knowing where I was. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the 3 years in the nursing home. They drugged me every day. I was in a state of semi-consciousness, without the strength to resist. In the brief moments I woke up, I tried to explain who I was, asked them to call my son, but everyone said I was confused, that it was delirium, and then came more medicine. The worst part, Eleanor continued, tears now falling freely, was not the physical pain. It was knowing that my son was out there, believing I had died, suffering for me while I was alive and imprisoned. It was imagining that he thought I had abandoned him, that I had left without saying goodbye. Gabriel cried too, as did Joanna, as did many people in the room. The prosecutor asked, "And when your son finally found you, how did you feel?" Eleanor looked at Gabriel, a sad smile on her face. I felt it was worth surviving. I felt I hadn't lost everything, that there was still hope. When Eleanor stepped down, the entire room was silent. The cruelty of what had been done to that woman was undeniable, impossible to ignore. Megan kept her head down, looking at no one. On the 5th day, it was Gabriel's turn to testify. He walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of all eyes. The prosecutor guided him through the story, from the day he received the news of his mother's supposed death to the moment Joanna approached him in the cemetery. "How did you feel when you discovered your mother was alive?" the prosecutor asked. Gabriel took a deep breath. It was as if the world had collapsed for the second time. The first was when I thought I had lost her. The second was when I discovered that loss was a lie, that for 3 years I cried, suffered, carried devastating guilt, all based on a farce. He looked at Megan, and the person responsible for that farce was the woman I loved, the woman I trusted completely, the woman who slept beside me every night, knowing that my mother was alive, imprisoned, suffering. "And how do you feel about her now?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Nothing. I feel absolutely nothing. The woman I loved never existed. It was just an illusion, a mask, and when the mask fell, all that remained was a stranger capable of unimaginable cruelties." On the 6th day, Megan finally had a chance to defend herself. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had acted under pressure, that she was trying to protect Gabriel from a manipulative mother-in-law, that things had gotten out of control, but the argument sounded hollow in the face of so much evidence. When Megan took the stand, she tried to cry, tried to appear remorseful, but her words were too calculated, too rehearsed. She took no real responsibility for anything. There was always an excuse, always someone else to blame. Gabriel watched the performance and felt pity, not for her but for the person he had been, the naive man who fell in love with an illusion, who didn't see the signs, who allowed it to happen. After 7 days of trial, the time came for closing arguments. The prosecutor was forceful, asking for the maximum penalty for the crimes committed. "This was not an impulsive act," she said. "It was a meticulously planned fraud that lasted 3 years. Helena Anderson was held prisoner, sedated, deprived of her freedom and dignity, and all of this for pure greed." The defense attorney tried to appeal for clemency, but his words sounded weak. The judge announced that the sentence would be delivered in 1 week. During that week of waiting, Gabriel spent a lot of time with his mother. They talked about everything, about the past, about the future, about forgiveness and justice. Eleanor surprised Gabriel by saying she didn't hate Megan. "Hate would destroy me, son," she explained. "I've already lost 3 years of my life to her wickedness. I won't waste any more time letting hate consume me. I want justice, yes, I want her to pay for what she did. But I also want to move forward, to live the time I have left by your side, making a difference through the foundation." Gabriel hugged his mother, impressed by her strength. "You are the strongest person I know." Eleanor smiled. "I'm not strong, son. I'm just a survivor. And survivors learn that the only way is forward." On sentencing day, the room was even more crowded than on the first day. Gabriel, Eleanor, and Joanna sat together, holding each other's hands. The judge entered and everyone stood. Dr. Mark Turner began to read the sentence, summarizing the crimes, the evidence, the testimonies. His voice was firm and solemn. This court finds Megan Anderson guilty of all crimes for which she was accused. The coldness and premeditation with which she acted, the duration of the suffering imposed on the victim, and the complete lack of remorse demonstrated make this one of the most serious cases I have ever judged. He paused. The sentence is 18 years in state prison, in addition to the full restitution of all embezzled funds with interest and a fine. The defendant also loses all rights to any assets related to the Anderson family. The room erupted in murmurs. Megan turned pale, her legs giving way. She had to be supported by the guards. Gabriel felt an immense weight lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't complete relief, not yet. But it was justice, finally justice. Outside, facing the journalists, Gabriel made a brief statement. Justice was served today. My mother can finally begin to heal the wounds of the past 3 years, and we can move forward knowing that the truth won. A journalist asked, "Can you forgive Megan?" Gabriel thought for a moment. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or justifying what was done, but it means not letting hate consume me. My mother taught me that. So yes, one day perhaps I can forgive, but I will never forget. That night, Gabriel organized a dinner at a discreet restaurant. Present were Eleanor, Joanna, Richard, Paul the investigator, and some close friends who had supported him throughout the process. It was a celebration, but also a moment of reflection. Richard raised his glass for a toast. To Eleanor, who survived the impossible, to Joanna, who had the courage to tell the truth, and to Gabriel, who never gave up seeking justice. Everyone toasted, but it was Eleanor who made the final toast. To new beginnings, she said, looking at each person there. All of us, in some way, had to start over. But we did it together, and that is the true victory. Gabriel looked at his mother, at Joanna, at his friends gathered, and for the first time in months felt a sense of peace. The path had been long and painful. The truth had come at a high cost, but it was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain, everything was worth it because in the end, the truth won. Justice was done, and life could begin again. A year had passed since the sentencing, a year of healing, rebuilding, and learning how to live again after the truth shattered everything he believed he knew. Gabriel was sitting in the Foundation's office, looking out the window at New York City stretching under the blue sky of a September afternoon. It was spring, and something about that season always brought with it a sense of renewal. The door opened and Eleanor entered, carrying a folder full of documents. At 74, she looked like a completely different woman from the one Gabriel had found in that nursing home a year ago. Her grey hair was well groomed, her face had regained a healthy color, and most importantly, the sparkle in her eyes had returned. She wore elegant but comfortable clothes and walked with a confidence that seemed to have been multiplied by the experience of having survived the worst. "Son, you need to see this," she said, placing the folder on the table. "These are the Foundation's reports for the last quarter. The numbers are impressive." Gabriel took the documents and began to read. In 1 year of operation, the Eleanor Anderson Foundation had assisted over 1,000 women, offering training courses, microcredit, and psychological support. But what impressed him most was the Invisible Voices program, conceived by Joanna. The task force had investigated 43 suspicious cases of missing elderly people or those in irregular situations. Of these, 12 had been confirmed as situations of abandonment or fraud. 12 people who, like Eleanor, had been forgotten by the world and were now being rescued. "Joanna did an incredible job," Gabriel said, smiling. "She learned from the best teacher," Eleanor replied with a mischievous smile. "Me." The two laughed, that light and genuine laughter of someone who had finally managed to let the weight of the past begin to transform into strength for the future. The relationship between mother and son had been rebuilt in an even deeper way than before. The 3 years of separation, however painful they had been, had taught both of them the value of every moment together. At that moment, Joanna entered the room. She also seemed like a transformed person. She was no longer the thin, nervous woman who had approached Gabriel in the cemetery. Now she dressed professionally. Her hair was well kept, and there was a confidence in her steps that came from knowing she had purpose, that her life mattered. "Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Anderson, we have visitors," she announced. They entered the main hall of the Foundation, where a group of women awaited them. They were beneficiaries of the program, women who had received support to start their own businesses. They brought gifts they had made themselves, handicrafts, sweets, flowers. It was a way of saying thank you, but also of showing that they were prospering. One of the women, Carmen, a 50-year-old lady, who had started a small sewing business, approached Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "You changed my life, Mrs. Anderson. I was hopeless, adrift, and now I have my own workshop. I'm supporting my family, all thanks to the foundation." Eleanor hugged Carmen warmly. "You changed your own life, dear. We just gave you the tools. The courage was always yours." Gabriel observed the scene and felt his chest warm. That was what mattered, not the money recovered, not revenge against Megan, not the newspaper headlines. It was this, real people having their lives transformed, having a second chance. After the visitors left, Gabriel, Eleanor, and Joanna gathered in the meeting room. There was something Gabriel wanted to discuss with them. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he began. "The foundation is working wonderfully, but I feel we can still do more. I want to expand, open offices in other cities, take the Invisible Voices program nationwide." Joanna immediately brightened. "I'd love that, Mr. Anderson. There are so many places where this is needed, so many forgotten people." Eleanor held her son's hand. "Are you sure? This will demand a lot from you, son. A lot of time, a lot of investment." Gabriel looked at his mother. "Mother, for 3 years I spent my time crying before an empty grave. Now I want to spend my time doing something that really matters, building something that will last, that will help people, that will honor what you went through." Eleanor smiled, her eyes welling up. "Then let's do it, together." That night, Gabriel returned to the apartment he had bought for himself after his divorce from Megan was finalized. It was a smaller place than the penthouse, but it was his, built on truth and not on lies. He prepared a simple dinner and ate alone, enjoying the silence. His phone rang. It was Richard. The two had maintained close contact throughout the year, and the lawyer had become not only a business partner, but a true friend. "Gabriel, I just wanted to give you some news," Richard said. "Megan filed an appeal, but it was denied. The sentence stands. She will serve the 18 years in full." Gabriel was silent for a moment. How did he feel about it? A year ago, perhaps he would have felt satisfaction. But now what he felt was just a distant sadness. Sadness for the person she could have been and chose not to be. "Thanks for letting me know, Richard. How are you, Gabriel?" "Really? I'm fine," Gabriel replied and realized it was true. "I'm moving forward. Life is strange, you know. A year ago I was at rock bottom, discovering that everything I believed was a lie. Today I'm building something real, something that matters. I guess in the end, she did me a favor." Richard laughed on the other end. "Only you could turn a tragedy like that into something positive." "I learned from the best," Gabriel said, thinking of his mother. The following weekend, Gabriel organized a special event. It was the foundation's 1-year anniversary, but also Eleanor's 75th birthday. He rented a beautiful hall, invited all the foundation's beneficiaries, staff, friends, and people who had supported them throughout the year. When Eleanor entered the hall and saw the decorations, the people, the smiles, she couldn't hold back her tears. Gabriel hugged her. "Happy birthday, Mother. This year you can truly celebrate." The party was joyful and emotional. There were speeches, laughter, music. Joanna presented the results of the Invisible Voices program, showing photos of the 12 people who had been rescued from irregular situations. Each photo was accompanied by a story of overcoming adversity, of new beginnings, of recovered hope. Gabriel gave a heartfelt speech. "A year ago, my life collapsed. I discovered that the person I loved was capable of unimaginable cruelties. I discovered that my mother, whom I had mourned for 3 years, was alive and imprisoned. It was the worst moment of my life. But it was also the moment that taught me what truly matters." He looked at Eleanor. "My mother taught me about strength, about how to survive the impossible, and still have the capacity to love, to forgive, to rebuild. Joanna taught me about courage, about how a person considered invisible by society can change lives through a single act of bravery. And all of you," he continued, looking at the foundation's beneficiaries, "teach me every day about resilience, about second chances, about how it's never too late to start over." The audience applauded. Eleanor went on stage and hugged her son, whispering in his ear, "I'm so proud of you." Then it was Eleanor's turn to speak. She looked at everyone present and began. "A year and a half ago, I was in a nursing home, sedated, nameless, without a story, without a future. The world had forgotten me. But one person didn't forget. Joanna believed in me when no one else did. She risked everything to save me, and because of that courage today I am here, alive, free, surrounded by people I love. I learned that we are never too old to start over. It's never too late for the truth to come out. And we should never underestimate the power of a single person who refuses to accept injustice." Tears flowed freely down the faces of many present. Joanna was crying too, but they were tears of joy. The night ended with music and dancing. Gabriel danced with his mother, the two slowly twirling to the sound of a soft song. "Thank you for never giving up, Mother," he said. "Thank you for finding me, son," she replied. A few days later, Gabriel had an unexpected meeting. One of the cases investigated by the Invisible Voices program had revealed a situation similar to Eleanor's. An elderly woman had been kept in a nursing home under a false identity by a nephew who wanted to control her inheritance. The woman had been rescued, and now the nephew was being investigated. The elderly woman's family came to the foundation to thank them personally. "You saved my grandmother," said the granddaughter, a young woman in her 20s. "We thought she had disappeared. The police couldn't find her. If it weren't for the foundation, we would never have discovered the truth." Joanna hugged the young woman. "That's exactly why we do this, so that no family has to live without answers." After they left, Gabriel looked at Joanna. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're saving entire families. You're preventing other people from going through what I went through." Joanna shook her head modestly. "I'm not doing anything alone, Mr. Anderson. It's a team effort." "But you are the heart of this work," Gabriel insisted, "and I want you to know that you are valued, not just as an employee but as family." Joanna smiled, that shy but genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. You are my family too, the only real family I've ever had." That night, Gabriel returned to Greenwood Cemetery for the first time since dismantling the false grave. But this time he wasn't there to cry. He was there to close a cycle. He walked to where Eleanor's headstone used to be. Now there was nothing, just grass growing over the empty space. Gabriel knelt and touched the earth. "I came here for 3 years believing a lie," he said in a low voice. "I cried here, I suffered here, I carried guilt here, but now I know the truth, and I came here to say goodbye. Not to my mother because she is alive and well, but goodbye to the man I was, that naive, blind man who believed in illusions." He stood up. In his place, a man was born who knows the value of truth, who understands the price of betrayal, but who also learned about forgiveness, about second chances, about transforming pain into purpose. Gabriel left the cemetery knowing he would never return. That chapter was closed. Real life, true life, was out there, waiting for him. 6 months later, the Eleanor Anderson Foundation opened its second branch in Miami, Florida. Gabriel, Eleanor, and Joanna were present at the inauguration. It was an emotional event, with hundreds of people attending, many of them sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. During the ceremony, a journalist asked Gabriel, "After everything that happened, what is the main lesson you learned from this experience?" Gabriel thought for a moment, looking at his mother beside him, at Joanna smiling among the guests, at all those people whose lives were being touched by the foundation. "I learned that the truth always finds a way," he replied. "It can take days, months, years. It can be buried under layers of lies, but eventually it comes to light. And when it does, it brings with it not only pain, but also liberation. Liberation to live truly, to love truly, to be truly free." That night, back in New York City, Gabriel had dinner with his mother at her apartment. They talked about plans to expand the foundation even further, about the new cases being investigated, about the life they were building together. "You know I love you, right, son?" Eleanor said suddenly. Gabriel held her hand. "I know, Mother. And you know I love you too," Eleanor smiled. "For 3 years I dreamed of this moment, being able to sit with you, talk, just be close. There were days when I thought it would never happen, but here we are." "Here we are," Gabriel repeated, feeling the weight and beauty of those words. They sat in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's company. Outside, New York City pulsed with its infinite energy, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. But there, in that apartment, Two people who had been separated by the cruelest lie were together again. And that, Gabriel thought as he looked at his mother, was all that truly mattered. The truth had won. Love had survived. And life, that real and true life they had fought so hard to reclaim, could finally be lived fully. The empty grave had been just that, empty. But the life they were building now, that was real. That was true, that was theirs, and no one ever again could take that from them. Gabriel looked out the window at the illuminated city and smiled. The past was in the past. The future was opening before them, full of possibilities, purpose, hope. And for the first time in many years, Gabriel felt truly at peace. The journey had been long and painful. The truth had come at a high cost. But in the end, it was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain, because in the end, they had won. Not against Megan, but against lies, against despair, against resignation. And that was the greatest victory of all. Dear listeners, we hope Gabriel and Eleanor's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, courage, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what moment touched you the most. Was it Joanna's courage to risk everything to save a stranger? Was it the devastating reunion between Gabriel and his mother in the nursing home? Or was it the transformation of a tragedy into hope through the foundation? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, stories about overcoming adversity, justice, and the unwavering power